Hello, everyone. My name is Ariella Wagner. I'm the founder of SunRay Construction Solutions and National Construction Document Service. We help thousands of general contractors, subcontractors, and suppliers secure their lien rights. Today, we have a spectacular webinar given by a brilliant attorney, Emily Pendleton, who is a construction expert attorney on what happens after I record my lien. How do I get paid? So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Emily Pendleton.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you all for hopping on this webinar and joining us. So a couple of my past presentations for SunRay have been with respect to, the procedures that are necessary to follow in order to properly perfect a mechanic's lien. And so today my presentation is going to focus on, what happens after you've recorded your lien. That's great, but at the end of the day, I haven't seen a check. So how do I get paid? Let's see. There we go. Okay, so if you have any questions, please feel free to add them in the webinar chat. And we'll try and address them at the end of the presentation. Okay, so let's start with what rights and abilities does your perfected lien give you? So first and foremost, it's going to give you leverage, which is critical when you're facing non-payment issues. Originally you probably felt fairly restricted in terms of negotiating directly with your customer, whether or not that's the general contractor or another subcontractor on these Texas construction projects. But your perfected lien is going to involve the owner because it gives you a direct claim as against the project owner. And so they're going to have a vested interest in ensuring you get paid. And so not only are you a direct line of communication with the entity who has failed to pay you, but now the owner's going to be asking questions. I've paid the funds downstream to ensure that this party gets paid. What is the bottleneck here? Second, it's going to give you security. Your perfected lien attaches to the title of the real property. And so now you have some security knowing that even if you hear things of, potential bankruptcy or insolvency of the owner entity or downstream, you know that there's some security there because your claim is now backed by the value of the real property asset. And so that can give you some peace of mind as well. And lastly, it's going to give you some priority. Oftentimes when there's non-payment issues on projects, you're not the only party who's performed work on this construction project that is having a non-payment issue. And so to the extent you're able to properly perfect your lien, you're going to take priority in certain funds over and above those who remain unpaid and failed to timely perfect their lien claim. Okay, so let's talk a little bit further about leverage and available claims that the perfected mechanic's lien gives you. So of course, you've always got your claim directly against the contracting entity for non-payment. Those are claims such as breach of contract, quantum merit, those sorts of things. But now your perfected mechanic's lien gives you a direct claim to foreclose on your lien, and that claim gets asserted directly against the owner. So let's talk about the owner's liability. Your perfected mechanic's lien creates liability on behalf of the owner in two separate sets of funds. Those are one, the reserved funds, which you might otherwise know as retainage on a project. And the second type of funds are what we like to call trapped funds. And these are the two types of funds that the owner can be held liable for if they fail to pay you for your perfected mechanic's lien. Okay, so the reserved fund, otherwise known as retainage, the statute has just defined the term reserved fund. It's the fund that the owner is statutorily required to retain from the general contractor throughout the course of the project, and it's equal to the 10% of the original contract price or if the project is not yet completed, it's going to be 10% of the value of the work performed. And the owner is required to withhold these funds from the general contractor until 30 days after the contract is complete. So this is a pot of money set aside specifically to satisfy lien claimants in the event that the general contractor or any subcontractor downstream fails to pay their contractual obligations. Okay, and the second fund of money that the owner is going to be liable for is trapped funds. These are funds that the owner pays to the general contractor after receipt of your pre-lien notice and failing to withhold amounts sufficient to satisfy the amount claimed in the pre-lien notice. So the owner can have some additional liability to the retainage in these trapped funds by failing to set aside amounts sufficient to cover your claim and failing to withhold those and paying them out to the general contractor. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about these two separate funds when it comes time to, asking these sorts of important questions of the owner and the general contractor as you start to investigate what is the problem with non-payment on this project. And so there are 3 steps to getting paid. The first one being, the most economical. What can you do to start the line of communication to figure out how can I get paid? First being to, investigate, establishing your line of communication directly with the owner and directly with the original contractor in order to determine, what is the real issue here. Your next step, to the extent those informal negotiations directly between the businesses is seemingly not going to work out, your next step is to go ahead and retain counsel. And if they can't get it resolved, then they're going to need to file suit. All right, so let's talk about what you can do after recording your lien to try and expedite the payment process. So first things first is establishing that line of communication with the owner, because like I said, the owner now has a vested interest in ensuring that you get paid. And so they're going to be the ones with liability because of your lien, your perfected lien on their property, and they're going to want it removed. And so it's best to just call up the owner and ask them some questions. First and foremost, confirming that the owner did in fact receive your lien notices and a copy of your lien affidavit to ensure that they're aware that you're out there and that you have not been paid. Second is just get intel regarding the payment problem. Straight up ask them, are you aware of why I have not received payment from the general contractor or the subcontractor on this project? What is the general contractor telling you about why I haven't been paid? Is there any sort of allegation that my work was done deficiently or there's any defects in the work? Just generally get as much information as you can from the owner about what is the payment problem on this project. So these next 2 questions are important to get at specifically the owner's potential liability. First asking, are you withholding funds from the general contractor to satisfy my lien claim? That's going to get at, have they trapped the funds necessary to satisfy my claim and, not paid those funds out to the general contractor yet? Did you withhold retainage from the general contractor throughout the course of the project? That's going to determine whether or not they've satisfied their obligation to withhold the reserved fund to satisfy your lien claim. And so those 2 questions are going to be really important to get information on to determine the owner's potential liability for your lien claim. And of course, ask them and be cooperative as possible. What information or documentation do you need from me in order to get my company paid? If they need any sort of additional invoicing or other types of information, definitely work with the owner to satisfy whatever they need in order to ensure that you get paid. Ask them, whether or not they'd be willing to pay your company via a joint check. I'm seeing it more and more often in the prime contract agreement, where the owner and the general contractor's agreement specifies the ability to make payments via joint check when a lien claim arises. And so that might be an option where the owner can ensure that the money that they're funding on this project to the general contractor is certainly going to reach you by issuing a joint check. And, always conclude these types of conversations with, nothing aggressive, but we'd like to avoid having to file any formal claims if we can get this payment issue resolved in the next 10 days. Put a deadline on it. At the end of the day, you're probably, your invoice is probably several months unpaid. And so having a short deadline may help to expedite the payment process. Okay, another form of investigation is to go ahead and contact the general contractor directly. You might already have, a lot of information from the general contractor about the payment issue to the extent that your contract is directly with the general contractor. But establishing a direct line of communication with the general contractor is particularly important if you are someone further down the chain, such as a second tier or third tier subcontractor. You'd want to approach the conversation with the general contractor very similar in terms of getting as much information about the payment problem as you can. Any sort of allegations of defective work, or is there just, is there a holdup on the owner's behalf? They're the ones who have failed to, there's a large invoice outstanding for several milestones, and once those get funded by the owner, the funds will come down to you. It's just, and that the owners told us they're supposed to issue payment, in no more than 30 days. So at least then you have a kind of general sense of, okay, when can I anticipate payment by? And one final thing to think about as you're having these conversations with both the owner and the general contractor is, think about whether or not you have the ability to negotiate. I mean, don't start out the conversation with, being willing to take a deduction on your invoice. But to the extent it's coming to the point where you're considering retaining counsel, you might consider whether or not taking a small reduction on your demand will save you both time and money. Perform a cost-benefit analysis of hiring an attorney to file a lawsuit, and whether or not, going ahead, if the payment could be issued sooner, what small reduction would you be able to make on the front end just to get paid that much faster and be done with the problem? Okay, so if these sorts of informal negotiations and discussions don't appear to be leading anywhere to getting you paid on your perfected lien, you're going to want to retain counsel. And I approach every client differently, but generally speaking, the first thing I do is to try and, do my own investigation. A call from an attorney may do the trick. Finding out whether or not they're already represented by counsel is beneficial information. And them finding out that you've retained counsel to prepare a lawsuit may add the pressure that's necessary to get you paid prior to needing to formally file a lawsuit. But to the extent those sorts of conversations with counsel do not lead anywhere, the ultimate step to getting you paid is to go ahead and file a lawsuit to foreclose on your perfected mechanics lien. And so it's important to know the timeline in which you need to make sure that you retain counsel and file suit to foreclose. And so the deadline to file suit to foreclose on your perfected mechanics lien is going to be 1 year after the last date that a claimant may file a lien affidavit. So generally speaking, that's going to be the 15th day of the 4th month after you completed your work. And so generally speaking, you're going to have 1 year from that last date you could have filed your lien affidavit to file your lawsuit for closing on your lien. One common misconception is to think, oh, well, you know, I don't want to go through that. Eventually, the owner is going to want to sell their property and I'm going to get paid just so that they can release the lien from their property, clear the title, and make the sale of the property. But that's not the case. You can't simply wait for the owner to sell the property in order to get paid. You have a 1 year limitation, and that limitations period may well before the owner ever wants to sell it. So to the extent that, you know, the owner finds themselves in a position where they paid out all the funds to the general contractor, they don't think they have any additional liability to you, and they're just going to sit and wait and see whether or not you file a lawsuit to foreclose on your lien. You're going to need to do that within 1 year and not wait for the opportunity of, you know, the owner selling their property in order to recover on your lien. Okay, and last but not least, you know, the lawsuit. Oftentimes when there's a straightforward, obviously perfected lien, the work's been done, there's no claim of deficient work, you know, getting all the parties together to be represented by counsel can be beneficial in getting you paid, especially when there's the opportunity for each and every party involved to have adequate representation, advising them of the risks and liabilities that they face the longer the non-payment issue drags on. Things like, you know, attorney's fees are accruing, things like interest is accruing the longer that the lien claim remains unpaid. So having those parties represented by counsel can expedite the process in getting you paid. And that's not to say that, you know, hauling off and filing a lawsuit means, oh, it's going to be a year or 2 years before I get paid. That's generally not the case. Approximately 95% of lawsuits settle before going to trial. And so oftentimes I see that when we file very straightforward lien foreclosure lawsuits, there's no claims of, you know, deficient work, defective work, things like that nature. They settle a lot sooner than having to go to trial. And there's, of course, ways to expedite difficult parties, such as things like motions for summary judgment and those sorts of tools that we have to expedite the payment process once the lawsuit is filed. And that concludes my how to get paid. Thank you all so much for joining, and I hope you learned a little bit of something.
That was really spectacular, Emily. Thank you so much. One of the most important things that people ask, you know, they're not paid, and what they say is, well, you know, Emily, we're out already $100,000 on this project. What are, if any, are there any rights that, will I get attorney's fees back in the event that I'm not paid? And we hire, of course, your law firm and you to you know, fight for our money. So what would you recommend for those potential clients?
Yes, so a lien foreclosure action against the owner is associated with a claim for both attorney's fees and costs associated with that foreclosure lawsuit that you're going to need to file. And so those sorts of claims do exist and add additional pressure on the owner to resolve the payment issue before things get out of hand. Too many attorney's fees are spent, you know, among all of the parties. And that also creates additional leverage for you, knowing that, you know, you have that added claim of not only do you owe the amounts under my lien now, but you also owe my fees for having to file this lawsuit to collect.
Wonderful. Well, We don't have any questions at the moment, but I know that from time to time, people like, oh my goodness, I forgot to ask this question. Emily's contact information is below. She's absolutely spectacular. If you need to retain an attorney, SunRay absolutely recommends Porter Hedges and Emily without a question. Incredible webinar. Thank you so much, Emily. And we have another webinar coming up next. I think our last one will be, getting paid faster with liens, bonds, and contracts on November 17th. So we definitely, especially with the end of the year, you want to be very aggressive with your collections. And this is going to be another spectacular webinar conducted by Emily. And Emily, if you wouldn't mind go back one slide for me, I'd very much appreciate it. So if you would like to give us a review on Google for this webinar, we would greatly appreciate it. All you have to do is put your phone up and we'll hold it there for just another minute and you can give us a review on Google. And other than that, Emily, thank you again. Really spectacular job. And I wish everyone a sunny day.
Thank you all. Thanks, Ariella.
Thank you so much.